The crimson glow beneath the water should have been my first warning that today would be different. But hindsight is a cruel mistress, and at 17, I thought I was invincible, especially in my own backyard. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've spent the last 3 years of my life perfecting what I call my sanctuary. Most teenagers have bedrooms plastered with posters and cluttered with gaming consoles. I have a pool that defies the laws of physics, nestled behind our modest 2-story house in suburban Phoenix. Not just any pool, a technological marvel that I've been secretly engineering since freshman year, funded by weekend jobs, birthday money, and the occasional borrowed component from Dad's electronics workshop. The pool itself looks ordinary, enough from the surface, standard rectangular shape, 12 feet deep, surrounded by weathered concrete and my mother's struggling desert roses. But beneath that deceptively calm surface lies a network of LED strips, thermal regulators, holographic projectors, and what I've dubbed the elemental control system, a masterpiece of teenage ingenuity that can transform ordinary chlorinated water into a convincing simulation of molten lava, Arctic ice, or even a swirling galaxy complete with floating stars. Today was supposed to be my day. My parents had driven to Tucson to visit my grandmother, leaving me with the house to myself for the first time in months. No interruptions. No questions about the strange humming sounds coming from the backyard at night. No worried glances when the electric bill arrived looking more like a small mortgage payment. The morning had been perfect for testing phase 3 of my latest upgrade. I'd been working on something I called sensory integration. Not just visual effects, but temperature manipulation, sound waves that created the illusion of crackling flames, and even a scent disperser that could make the air smell of sulfur and smoke. The lava mode was my masterpiece, complete with bubbling sounds, heat that radiated from the water's surface, and a deep red glow that made the pool look like a gateway to the Earth's core. I'd slipped into my swim trunks at precisely 10 a.m., activated the system with my waterproof remote, and spent 2 glorious hours floating in what appeared to be molten rock. The sensation was intoxicating. The warm water against my skin, the dramatic lighting painting everything in shades of orange and red, the ambient sounds of a volcanic eruption playing through underwater speakers. For those precious moments, I wasn't Marcus Chen, the awkward kid who built computers for extra credit and ate lunch alone in the library. I was a fire elemental, master of volcanic forces, ruler of my own digital domain. The illusion was so complete that I'd almost convinced myself I was actually floating in lava. The thermal regulators kept the water at exactly 104 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to feel authentic without causing burns. The holographic projectors created convincing bubbles and streams of molten rock that seemed to flow around my body. The scent disperser filled the air with the sharp smell of volcanic sulfur, while hidden speakers rumbled with the sound of shifting tectonic plates. I was in the middle of practicing what I called my volcanic poses, dramatic gestures that looked appropriately elemental when reflected in the glowing water, when I heard the back gate creak open. My blood turned to actual ice, despite the heated pool around me. "Marcus?" The voice belonged to Sarah Martinez, my lab partner from advanced chemistry and the girl I'd been harboring a secret crush on since sophomore year. "Your mom said I could find you back here. I brought the notes you— Oh my God!" The scream that followed could have shattered windows. I spun around in the water, my heart hammering against my ribs, to see Sarah standing frozen by the gate. Her usually perfect brown hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore the same vintage band t-shirt and worn jeans that made her look effortlessly cool. But her face was a mask of absolute terror. From her perspective, I realized with growing horror she wasn't seeing Marcus Chen floating in a technologically advanced swimming pool. She was seeing her classmate apparently swimming in a pool of actual molten lava, his skin somehow unburned, his body moving through liquid fire as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Sarah, wait!" I called out, but she was already backing toward the gate, her chemistry textbook tumbling from her hands to scatter notes across the concrete. "I can explain. You're in—" She couldn't seem to form complete sentences, her eyes wide and reflecting the red glow of my artificial lava. "How are you not— Why aren't you—" I lunged toward the edge of the pool, forgetting in my panic that sudden movements would make the holographic effects more dramatic. As I moved, the sensors triggered a particularly impressive display of lava splashing, complete with particle effects that made it look like molten rock was cascading around me. The scent disperser, responding to the motion sensors, released an extra burst of sulfur smell that made Sarah take another step backward. "This isn't what it looks like," I shouted, which was possibly the most ridiculous thing I could have said, given that it looked exactly like what it was, a teenage boy swimming in lava. Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You're you're not human." Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the sudden silence as I treaded water, it might as well have been a shout. "What are you?" The question hit me like a physical blow. What was I? In that moment, suspended in my artificial lava with the girl of my dreams, staring at me like I was a monster, I honestly wasn't sure anymore. I'd spent so many hours in this pool, so many days perfecting these illusions, that the line between Marcus the teenager and Marcus the fire elemental had begun to blur. The heat felt natural against my skin now. The red light seemed like my native environment. Sometimes, late at night when I was testing new features, I forgot that I was just a kid with a talent for electronics and too much time on his hands. "Sarah, please," I said, swimming slowly toward the shallow end where I could stand. "Let me show you. It's not what you think." But she was already shaking her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Stay away from me," she whispered. "Just stay away." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 3 years building this sanctuary, this perfect refuge from a world that never quite made sense to me, and now, the one person I wanted to share it with was running away like I was some kind of supernatural threat. As I watched Sarah flee through the back gate, leaving her scattered notes behind like evidence of her terror, I realized that my sanctuary had just become my prison. The lava mode suddenly felt less like an achievement and more like a cruel joke. Here I was, master of digital elements, controller of artificial environments, and I couldn't even control the most basic element of all, human connection. I floated, there in my fake molten rock, listening to the distant sound of Sarah's car starting in the driveway, and wondered if some discoveries were meant to stay hidden forever. The pool's systems hummed around me, maintaining their perfect illusion, but for the first time since I'd built this place, I felt completely alone. The scent of sulfur hung heavy in the air, and I realized it smelled exactly like regret. 3 days passed before I worked up the courage to leave my room for longer than trips to the bathroom. 3 days of staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment when Sarah's face transformed from curiosity to terror. 3 days of my parents, asking increasingly worried questions about why I hadn't touched my pool, why the electricity bill had suddenly dropped, why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. If only they knew their son had become one. On the 4th day, Mom cornered me at breakfast. With that look, the one that said she was switching from concerned parent mode to investigative journalist mode. She set down her coffee mug with the deliberate precision of someone preparing for battle. "Marcus, we need to talk." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot that made my blood freeze. It was a social media post from Sarah's account. "Sometimes you discover people aren't who you think they are. Sometimes they're something else entirely. Staying safe. Trust your instincts." The post had 47 likes and 16 comments, most of them variations of, "Are you okay?" and "What happened?" But it was the timestamp that really got me, posted at 2:17 a.m. the night after she'd seen me. She'd been awake, thinking about it, scared enough to warn her friends about me without actually saying what she'd witnessed. "Want to explain why Sarah Martinez thinks you're dangerous?" Mom's voice had that edge it got when she'd already solved half the puzzle and was waiting for me to fill in the blanks. I could have lied. Should have lied. Instead, I found myself saying, "What if I told you that I've been building something in the backyard, something that might seem impossible?" Dad looked up from his newspaper, his engineering instincts already engaged. "Impossible how?" And that's how I found myself leading my parents through the back gate, my hands shaking as I powered up the pool system for the first time since Sarah's visit. I'd simplified it, toned down the effects, started with just the basic LED lighting. Even so, when the water began to glow a soft blue-green, Dad's newspaper hit the concrete with a thud. "Marcus," Mom whispered. "What did you build?" The explanation took 2 hours. I showed them every component, walked them through every system, demonstrated each of the 12 different environmental modes I'd programmed. The underwater city, mode, with its holographic buildings and schools of digital fish. The space nebula setting that made you feel like you were floating among the stars. The prehistoric ocean, complete with shadow puppets of ancient sea creatures projected onto the pool floor, and finally, reluctantly, the lava mode. When the water transformed into convincing molten rock, Dad sat down hard on one of the pool chairs, running his hands through his graying hair. "Son," he said quietly, "this is beyond anything I've seen in 20 years of electrical engineering. Where did you even begin?" But it was Mom's reaction that surprised me most. Instead of the fear or anger I'd expected, her eyes filled with something that looked like pride. "You built yourself a world," she said softly. "A place where you could be anyone, do anything." "But it's all fake," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "Just lights and heat and computer tricks. And now Sarah thinks I'm some kind of monster because I was too stupid to turn it off before she got here." "Maybe," Dad said, standing up and walking to the edge of the pool where digital lava bubbled convincingly. "But the feelings weren't fake, were they? The peace you found here, the confidence, the sense of control, that was real." He was right, and I hated him for it. For 3 years, this pool had been my sanctuary, my fortress against a world that often felt too bright, too loud, too demanding. In here, I wasn't the quiet kid who stumbled over words when pretty girls talked to him. I was someone who could command elements, who had built something impossible with his own 2 hands. "The problem," Mom said, settling into the chair next, to Dad, "is that you've been living 2 lives, Pool Marcus and real Marcus, and they're not the same person." "Pool Marcus is braver," I admitted. "Is he?" She gestured toward the still glowing water. "Because real Marcus built all of this. Real Marcus spent 3 years learning advanced electronics and programming and thermodynamics. Real Marcus created something that scared a teenage girl so badly she thought she was witnessing actual magic." The next morning I found Sarah at her locker, surrounded by her usual crowd of friends. My hands were sweating, and I'd rehearsed my speech 17 times. But when she looked up and saw me, approaching, the fear that flashed across her face made all my words evaporate. "Sarah," I managed, "could we talk, please?" Her friends formed a protective semicircle around her, and I recognized the look they were giving me, the same one people give to wasps that get too close to their picnic. Dangerous, unpredictable, other. "I don't think that's a good idea," her best friend Jessica said, stepping slightly in front of Sarah. "It's okay," Sarah said quietly, though her voice shook. 2 minutes, Marcus. In the hallway, where people can see us." We walked in silence to a relatively quiet stretch of hallway near the science labs. Sarah kept a careful distance between us, her back to the wall, one hand on her phone, ready to call for help or run, whichever became necessary first. "I need you to know," I said, the words tumbling out faster than I'd planned, "that I'm not what you think I am. I'm not some kind of supernatural creature or mutant or whatever. I'm just a kid who's really good with electronics." She stared at me for a long moment. "Electronics don't let you swim in lava, Marcus." "It wasn't lava. It was..." I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken of the pool's construction. Circuit boards, LED arrays, holographic projectors, thermal regulators. It was all technology, lights and heat and sound effects. I built it over 3 years, piece by piece. Sarah took the phone, scrolling through the images. Her expression shifted from fear to confusion to something that might have been wonder. "You built this? All of it?" "Every component. Every line of code." I know it looked impossible, but it's just really advanced special effects. Like a movie set, but underwater. She handed the phone back, but didn't step away from the wall. Why? The question I'd been dreading. Why build something so elaborate just to swim alone? Why spend years perfecting an illusion? Why create a fantasy world when the real one was right there waiting? Because, I said, and my voice cracked on the word. In there, I wasn't afraid of anything. Not of talking to people, not of being judged, not of failing. In there, I was someone who could do impossible things. But you did do something impossible, Sarah said softly. You built that. You created something I couldn't tell apart from actual magic. But I'm still just me. Still the kid who eats lunch alone and can't string 2 sentences together when... I stopped, realizing I was about to admit my crush on her right there in the hallway. When what? When people I care about are around, I finished lamely. Sarah was quiet for a long time, studying my face like she was seeing me for the first time. Finally, she said, "The pool scared me because it was impossible. But you know, what scares me more?" "What?" "That you thought you needed to be impossible to be interesting." The words hit me like a physical blow. She was right. I'd spent so much time building elaborate fantasies because I thought the real me, awkward, quiet, ordinary Marcus, wasn't worth knowing. "I've been watching you in chemistry class," Sarah continued, and my heart did something complicated in my chest. "You see patterns that nobody else sees. You solve problems in ways that make me wish I could think like you do. You're patient when I don't understand something, and you never make me feel stupid for asking questions." "But we barely talk." "Because you think you're not worth talking to," she said, and there was something almost angry in her voice now. "You built this incredible thing, this technological marvel, and you hid it away like it was something to be ashamed of instead of something to be proud of." I wanted to argue with her, to explain that it wasn't that simple, that the pool was my refuge from a world that often felt too complex to navigate. But looking at her face, really looking, not just stealing glances like I usually did, I saw something I'd never noticed before. Sarah Martinez, the girl I'd put on a pedestal for 2 years, the one I thought was impossibly out of my league, was looking at me like I was the impossible one. "I'm sorry I ran," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I posted that thing online. I was scared and I didn't understand and I made it worse for you. You don't have to apologize for being terrified. I would have been terrified too." "Maybe," she said, "but I should have trusted you enough to ask for an explanation instead of assuming the worst." We stood there in the hallway, the morning, rush of students flowing around us like water around stones, and I felt something shift between us. Not the dramatic transformation I'd always imagined would happen if Sarah ever really noticed me, but something quieter and more real, like the moment when you finally adjust the focus on a telescope and the blurry light resolves into something you can actually see. "Marcus," she said, "would you show me? The pool, I mean, all of it. I want to understand what you built." "You want to come back? I want to see it through your eyes this time," she said. "Not as something scary, but as something amazing." That afternoon, I found myself standing by the pool again, but everything felt different. Sarah sat on the edge, her feet dangling in the water as I demonstrated each emu.